ice caps on both poles of the planet are melting. And not just a few, all of them. If all this ice melted, it would be catastrophic. How much would the sea levels rise? How would this impact global temperatures? And what would this mean for life on Earth? This is What If, and here's what would happen if all the world's ice melted. Sea levels are rising around the globe at around 4.8 millimeters every year. Glaciers and ice sheets are melting due to global warming. And climate scientists estimate that the average temperature on Earth could increase from the current 14 degrees Celsius to 27 degrees Celsius. At this pace, you would witness devastating floods on coastal lands, and parts of the world would be entirely lost to the sea. But if all the world's ice melted away, things would go south fast. Hey, since we're talking about ice, let's start with a cold, hard fact. If all the world's glaciers and ice sheets melted, sea levels would rise an astonishing 65 meters. All over the world, countries with an elevation below this level would cease to exist. Farewell to the Maldives, Singapore, and Denmark. Sorry you never got to visit them. The 37 million people living in those areas would have to evacuate and head for higher elevations. And fast. And a lot of the populated coastlines around the world would have to be evacuated too. In North America, the entire Atlantic seaboard would vanish. That means Disney World in Florida wouldn't be a small world, it would be an underwater world. On the West Coast, the hills of San Francisco would become a cluster of islands, and the Golden Gate Bridge would stick out from the sea until it rusts away and disappears into the ocean. Millions of people in the United States would lose their home and move further inland. If you live in Denver, Colorado, your home city might be bustling. In South America, the Amazon and Paraguay River basins would become inlets for the Atlantic Ocean. And big urban centers like Buenos Aires or Montevideo would disappear. Europe would say goodbye to many of its cities. Venice would become a modern-day Atlantis, and London's Big Ben would now strike midnight from underwater. Large parts of Asia would be devastated by the swelling seas. Nearly 800 million people would lose their homes in China, India, and Bangladesh. Australia could become more hospitable as an inland sea develops, but it would be bad news for the 80% of Australians living on the coastal strip. You'd be the lucky one if you lived in Africa, where large parts of land would be spared from global flooding. Unfortunately, the world would lose one of the ancient wonders, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It would be swamped by the Mediterranean. But flooding of the continents would only be the tip of the iceberg. The world would also lose 90% of its fresh water. Yeah, this is how much is stored in the Antarctic ice sheet. This ice water would mix with the ocean and dramatically disrupt its salt levels. Many aquatic animals that have evolved to live in salt water would go extinct. Diluted water would also impact the ocean currents. The Gulf Stream, which brings warm air to northern Europe, would become weak or even stop. And this would make temperatures plummet in that region. And there's more bad news. The glacial freshwater stores some toxic chemicals like DDT, and the Arctic permafrost has as much mercury as everywhere else on the planet combined. As these toxic chemicals and elements ended up in rivers, lakes, and groundwater reserves, they would poison many people. The melting of the permafrost would also be a feast for microorganisms that feed on the organic matter frozen inside. These organisms will, pardon my French, fart out a lot of greenhouse gases that could cause a global temperature rise of 3.5 degrees Celsius. Listen, most of life on Earth would not survive this disaster, but I have good news for you. Scientists estimate that all of the Earth's ice wouldn't melt overnight. If climate change keeps going at the same rate, it will take 5,000 years. But if we begin to make serious changes to our climate policies, maybe we could avoid it altogether. We could, for example, start with refreezing the Arctic. But that's a story for another What If.